He was the most important artist of the 20th century, his name synonymous with modern art. His early revolutionary painting and sculpture, with its bold, never-before-seen distortions of reality, continues to influence countless other artists. Throughout his long and turbulent life, his work was endlessly inventive, and his fame and wealth increased decade by decade. Critics and historians generally agree that he was the most influential and most prolific artist of the modern era. Páblo Picasso. Páblo Ruiz Picasso was born in Malaga, Spain on October 25, 1881. Picasso would inherit his mother's appearance, including her dark, penetrating eyes and her vivacious personality. From his father, he would draw his artistic abilities, although he would quickly surpass his father's talents. Encouraged by his artist father and also impelled by natural inclination, Picasso started drawing at an early age. Picasso's family, including his sisters and cousins, were astounded at the boy's ability. Most impressed, however, was Picasso's father, who saw that his son possessed an extraordinary talent. An adult Picasso once remarked while visiting an exhibition of children's drawings, "When I was their age, I could draw like Raphael, but it took me a lifetime to learn to draw like them." In 1888, with the birth of Picasso's sister Concepcion, family finances became increasingly strained, and in 1891, Picasso's father was forced to take a better job teaching art at a high school in the town of La Coruña. Adding to Picasso family woes was the death of their daughter Concepcion, a victim of diphtheria. Pablo, however, although merely 10 years old, seemed to flourish in the new environment and began his formal art training at the Da Guarda Institute. Ignoring his other studies, Picasso concentrated on drawing, spending endless hours at the art school where his father taught. In the studios among students much older, Picasso drew surprisingly accurate and subtle copies of the plaster casts of classical sculpture commonly used at that time as models. 4 years after they moved to La Coruña, the Picassos relocated again, this time to Barcelona, where Picasso's father took a prestigious job as instructor of drawing and painting at Barcelona's School of Fine Arts. Soon Pablo was a student at the Art Academy, where his father was an instructor. He completed in one day an entrance examination, which an entire month was allotted. The 15-year-old Picasso astounded the faculty with his uncanny talent. Picasso's father was so impressed by his son's remarkable gift that he decided never to paint again and gave Pablo all his paints and brushes. That same year, Picasso's father rented a studio for his son, where Pablo further developed his skills, painting extraordinary portraits of members of his family. These early paintings not only captured the precise look of his subjects, but also conveyed an emotional depth that seemed an unlikely achievement for a teenaged artist. During this period, Picasso also painted his famous picture, Science and Charity, the first work he exhibited publicly. The painting eventually won several prizes, including awards in Madrid and Malaga. Picasso was on his way to becoming a professional artist, but no one could envision the revolutionary new directions his art would take. In 1897, Picasso enrolled as a student at the Royal Academy of San Fernando in Madrid, Spain's premier art school. More stimulating and instructive for Picasso was Madrid's Prado Museum, where the great masterpieces of Spanish painting and sculpture were housed. Here, in the quiet galleries, Picasso gazed with wonder on the art of El Greco, Velázquez, Goya, absorbing everything he could learn from these masters. So profoundly affected was Picasso by these works that they continued to influence his art throughout his long career. By night, Picasso moved through Madrid's cafes and bistros, sketchbook always at hand, drawing the citizens of this bohemian underworld. Picasso became ill late that year and spent the early weeks of 1898 recuperating in a small Spanish mountain village called Horta de Ebro. Impressed with the beauty and mystery of the surrounding countryside and liberated by the freedom of living away from the restraints of family and school, Picasso would later claim that the experience transformed him. He returned later that year to Barcelona a different young man and a more mature artist than when he had left. Although Picasso found Barcelona and Madrid artistically and intellectually stimulating, Paris at the turn of the century was the center of the art world, with its Impressionist and Post-Impressionist painters in the vanguard of the modern movement. In 1900, Picasso made his first visit to Paris, where he would eventually live more than 4 decades, and where he created most of the masterpieces of painting and sculpture for which he became world-renowned. His fascination with French artists Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec and Paul Cézanne would greatly affect his early artistic patterns. In early 1901, while visiting Paris, Picasso met Pere Magnac, a Spanish art dealer residing in Paris. Magnac was so impressed that he offered Picasso a monthly cash subsidy that enabled the artist to rent a studio and live in Paris in relative comfort while he produced canvas after canvas. Picasso worked tirelessly, often saying, "I paint as I breathe. One must work, work, work." Some days he completed 2 or 3 paintings, and he continued to create prodigiously throughout his long life. Magnac introduced Picasso to Ambroise Vollard, an influential Paris art dealer and gallery owner, where in June 1901, Picasso had his first major Paris exhibition. Critics praised Picasso's paintings for their pure color and spontaneity, but also remarked that the young artist still lacked a personal style. Also evident in Picasso's art was the influence of the Impressionists, once laughed at and rejected for their revolutionary methods. But by the early 1900s, Paris's receptiveness to the Impressionists captured a wider following among adventurous collectors and critics. The Impressionist painters used pure color, often directly from the tube, and painted quickly to capture an impression of the ever-changing light falling on water, or a cityscape or landscape. The Impressionist artists made no attempt to depict people or objects in a strictly realistic manner. Instead, they painted with simplicity, suggesting subject matter with spontaneous brushwork, line, and color, rather than with more precise drawing, shading, and accurate color. These Impressionist principles of painting were the most pronounced influences on Picasso's art during his first months in Paris, and are reflected in such works of his as Les Moulins de la Galette, Portrait of Gustave Coucquot, and Stuffed Shirts. Also, during early 1901, Picasso received word of a close friend's suicide. His sadness apparently triggered the so-called Blue Period that would last through 1904. The Blue Period is a series of striking studies reflected in generally dark, gloomy color and depressing subject matter, which included portraits of blind men and women, the poverty-stricken, and working people in states of near starvation. The painter's deepest concerns are evident in such works as La Vie, Blind Man's Meal, Seated Woman with Child, Two Women at a Bar, and The Old Guitarist. He regularly exhibited these works at Barcelona's Four Cats Café, a famous gathering place for artists, writers, and intellectuals of the day. In 1904, Picasso moved to Paris permanently, taking a top-floor studio in an old building called the Bateau Lavoie, the laundry barge, in the Montmartre section of the city. Now in his early 20s and exhibiting regularly, Picasso had been signing his paintings P. Ruiz Picasso, using both his mother's and father's last name, which was the custom in Spain. But at the urging of friends who noted that Ruiz was so common a Spanish name, Pablo decided to drop Ruiz and sign his work simply, uniquely, and memorably, Picasso. In the summer of 1904, Picasso painted the last of his Blue Period works, Woman with Helmet of Hair. In the autumn of 1904, Fernande Olivier, a beautiful young woman who Picasso would use as a model frequently, entered his life. Picasso's new romance and the excitement of Paris soon conquered his depression, and he felt a new, youthful joy in living. A fresh, life-affirming period of art became apparent as Picasso began a series of paintings depicting circus performers, acrobats, jugglers, clowns, and harlequins. Picasso went frequently to Paris's famous Cirque Medrano and used the circus entertainers and their colorful costumes as subjects for his new work. The new paintings, in contrast to Picasso's blue period, although still somewhat melancholy, suggested that he was emerging from his dark mood. Pinks and rose tones dominated many of these paintings and became known as Picasso's Rose period. Well established now among the artists, writers, and intellectuals of Montmartre, Picasso made many new friends and acquaintances, among them the influential writer and art collector Gertrude Stein. A portrait that Picasso painted of her in 1906 is simultaneously realistic and abstract. Abstract since certain details not essential to the portrait have been taken out or abstracted. Soon another major change would occur in Picasso's work, a change regarded as shocking and revolutionary, which shattered old conceptions of art and which eventually transformed the way people looked at and thought about painting. In 1906 and 1907, Picasso made many visits to Paris's Trocadero Museum, where he became enchanted by the beauty and power of African art and sculpture. Drawing heavily on these influences and the influence of Impressionist painter Paul Cézanne, in 1907, Picasso painted an enormous canvas almost 8 feet square, which he titled Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. 5 semi-nude women in a highly abstract and distorted style, their bodies depicted with lines and planes rather than realistically, are rendered to the canvas. The faces of 3 women appear grotesque and mask-like, resembling the African sculpture Picasso had seen at the Trocadero Museum. The other 2 faces look almost childlike in their abstract simplicity. Their mouths are shown as straight slashes, their noses like inverted figure 7s, and their eyes wide ovals with dark pupils. The colors are simple, mainly varieties of flesh-toned brown and blue. The brush strokes are apparently applied quickly and spontaneously in the Impressionist manner, and some areas of the painting seem unfinished. Picasso's friends and fellow artists reacted to the new painting with shock and almost amused disapproval. In the years to come, however, knowledgeable artists and critics changed their opinion of Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, and the painting would be recognized as a revolutionary breakthrough in art, the first painting in a new history-making art movement that would eventually sweep through the world, Cubism. Not long after completing Demoiselles, Picasso was introduced to French artist Georges Braque. Braque immediately was enraptured with the genius of both the painting and its creator. The chemistry between the 2 artists was instantaneous, and together they would breathe life and momentum into this new abstract art movement of Cubism. Cubism eventually influenced the works of sculptors, musicians, and poets. A complex assimilation of many influences, Cubism was considered to be a logical result of the post-impressionist period. Together, Picasso and Braque shared a studio and focused on the evolution of the Cubist approach to art. In Cubism, the subject matter is broken up conceptually into geometrical units, or small cubes. By 1909, the development of Cubism well underway, Picasso and Olivier traveled to a discontented Spain. Ill at ease with the political and social climate of Barcelona, Picasso revisited the peasant village of Horta de Ebro. Art historians attribute the Spanish landscape with its tiered hills and stucco homes as inspirational in the art form. His paintings by now were exhibited in Paris, Budapest, London, and Germany. Critics still were insecure with Cubism, and Picasso's paintings were described by one critic as a return to barbarism and primitive savagery, a repudiation and an utter abasement of all the beauties in life and nature. A more liberal reviewer wrote, "I frankly disclaim any pretension to an understanding or even an appreciation of Picasso. I am awed by him." While his 7-year personal relationship with Olivier was fading, his international reputation was clearly making lively news. By 1913, synthetic cubism evolved through his work Man with a Guitar. With this phase, the forms were less analytical, being replaced by large, flat, colorful shapes that symbolized the objects. On May 2nd, Picasso received word that his father was gravely ill, only to learn the very next day that he had died. Grief-struck by the loss of his greatest mentor, Pablo paid his respects in Spain and returned to Paris depressed. For the next months, the political climate of Europe would simmer until the final outbreak of World War I in August of 1914. Picasso's dear friend Braque joined the French forces and went to battle. His native Spain remained neutral and only added to Pablo's mixed feelings about the need for the war. In addition, he had many German friends. His blurred feelings were further complicated with the news that his new lover, Eva, was seriously ill with tuberculosis. Her death on December 15, 1915, left Picasso lonely and uninspired to work. Around him, a war-weary Paris hungered for entertainment and had embraced the ballet Firebird by Russian composer Igor Stravinsky. Seeing an opportunity, Jean Cocteau, a French poet, friend, and admirer of Picasso, then took it upon himself to introduce Picasso to the world of ballet and French composer Erik Satie. After some persuasion, Cocteau managed to pair Satie and Picasso in the creation of a ballet called Parade. The ballet proved a creative diversion where Picasso created the costumes and set design. While most friends discouraged him from the venture, Pablo immersed himself into the production. His enthusiasm was undoubtedly kindled with a new romance, ballerina Olga Koklova, whom he would eventually marry in 1918. On May 18, 1917, Parade opened and immediately offended its French audience with its unconventional approach to ballet. Parade suffered critical lambasting only to be hailed later as a modern masterpiece. Among the few contemporaries to treat the ballet kindly was French poet Guillaume Apollinaire. He applauded the ballet's creative linking of choreography with costume and decor into what he described as a more complete art form. The thick-skinned Picasso ignored the controversy. Rather, he devoted himself once again to painting the woman in his life, resulting in a portrait of Olga in an armchair. In the painting, Olga asked that he make her more recognizable. By the early 1920s, Picasso's sculpture and paintings moved away from the strong Cubist style. He increasingly pursued opposite directions, depicting figures in subtle detachment, a neoclassical approach. This included Three Women at the Spring and The Bathers. Tremendous international success, as well as the birth of his first child, Paulo, spurred Picasso on. His art garnered high prices, and Cubism was now considered a vast influence in the world of art. He also continued to design costumes and sets for the ballet. During the summer of 1921, Pablo painted two famous versions of Three Musicians. The Three Musicians bridged the gap between Cubism and the dawning of Surrealism. By 1925, the Surrealist art movement was strongly reflected in The Three Dancers, a major painting of this period. By now, he had also moved on to his next romantic interlude with Marie-Thérèse Walter, a 17-year-old beauty over 30 years his junior. Marie-Thérèse served as a frequent model for his series of Sleeping Women in 1932 to 1933. In Spain, his early love, Fernande Olivier published excerpts of her memoirs that described her affair with Picasso. Lacking control of the situation and the publicity, Picasso took his frustrations out on his wife Olga and his lover Marie-Thérèse. Art produced during this time explored the theme of the mythical Minotaur, a powerful, violent beast. Picasso's personal rage could also be witnessed in Death of a Toreador. To complicate matters further, the young Marie-Thérèse was pregnant. Upon hearing the news, Olga Picasso took their son and left her husband. While Pablo welcomed the separation, he did not desire a divorce, which under French law would result in transferring half his wealth and paintings to his wife. On September 5, 1935, Marie-Thérèse gave birth to a daughter who Picasso named Maya. While he relished being a father, he no longer was enchanted with Marie-Thérèse. For a brief time, his art seemed to suffer a lack of momentum. Then in early 1936, another young woman entered his life, Dora Maar. In addition to being beautiful, Dora possessed sophistication and intellect. Her ability to discuss art and philosophy captivated Picasso. In Spain, a full-scale civil war ensued and distressed Picasso, though he spent long days in his studio. Picasso's personal opposition to Francisco Franco's nationalists is evident in his January 1937 etching, Dream and Lie of Franco, in which the Spanish general is depicted as a grotesque buffoon. While Europe teetered once again on the brink of another world war, Spain's internal struggles continued. Franco's fascist legions and the Spanish Republic clashed. On April 26, 1937, Franco's Nazi allies bombed and destroyed the Basque village of Guernica, stunning the entire world with its massive loss of nearly 2,000 lives in only 3 hours. The shocking photos of the village after the bombing launched Picasso into work. An 11.5 by 25.5 foot canvas became his testimony, condemning the violence in the most powerful manner possible to him. It was titled simply Guernica. Guernica depicted the horrifying brutality of the episode and was installed in the Spanish pavilion at the Paris World Fair. Meanwhile, fascism steadily increased in Europe as the world watched with dread. In March 1938, German troops entered Austria. In 1939, the fascists seized Barcelona and Madrid. By March, the Germans invaded Prague, and on September 1st, they assaulted Poland. 2 days later, the Allies, including France, declared war on Germany. In 1940, the Germans had entered France. During the Nazi occupation, Picasso was regularly harassed by the Germans but allowed to remain in Paris. The Nazis forbade anyone to exhibit Picasso's art. He received invitations to reside in the United States and in Mexico. But his determination kept him in Paris, where he experienced a creative atmosphere despite the Nazi presence. Of art as a weapon, Picasso is later quoted as saying, "Painting is not made to decorate apartments. It's an offensive and defensive weapon against the enemy." At the end of the war, Picasso began a love affair with an inspiring painter, Françoise Guillot. She would become his model and mother to his children Claude and Paloma. In 1948, he moved Françoise and their children to a villa on the Riviera, where he devoted his energies to revitalizing the town's ceramics industry. Picasso remained politically active. His 1949 Dove of Peace lithograph was adopted as the symbol of the World Peace Congress. With the beginning of the Korean War in 1950, he felt compelled to paint Massacre in Korea. The Korean War ended in 1953, and Picasso settled into a villa at Cannes, France. Françoise moved back to Paris with the children, and Picasso entered a new relationship with Jacqueline Roque. In 1961, Pablo married Jacqueline. His first wife, Olga, died in 1955. By now, he had amassed an extraordinary body of work, and his life was filled with continuous acclaim. Through the early 1960s, the artist continued to experiment and innovate. In 1964, he completed a model of the Chicago Civic Center sculpture based on his Head of a Woman. As the decade drew to a close, Picasso's health was clearly waning. In spite of this, in 1968 alone, he made 347 engravings and continued to paint. Meanwhile, numerous Picasso retrospectives presented the artist's long and prolific life. During this era, he returned to the old masters of the art world and reinterpreted their works. In 1969, The Man with the Golden Helmet was unveiled as Picasso's version of Rembrandt. Of this experimentation with Rembrandt and other masters such as Goya, Manet, and Delacroix, he once said, "I don't steal, I take." The aging Picasso was admitted to the hospital at various times, each time insisting that he was feeling fine and saying, "You know, you must never equate age with death. The one has nothing to do with the other." On April 8, 1973, the master's heart failed and he died with Jacqueline at his side. Picasso continued to paint right up until the very end. Picasso, the artist, spent his life destroying convention. He meandered through various art forms and left a legacy that secures his name within the company of the most important artists of the 20th century. At any given moment, somewhere in the world, even disregarding the various Picasso museums, you are likely to find an exhibition devoted to this prolific Spanish artist that honors his gifts and his genius. Of his individuality, Picasso told the story. My mother said to me, if you become a soldier, you'll be a general. If you become a monk, you'll end up as the Pope. Instead, I became a painter and wound up as Picasso.